It began on a blistering Kentucky afternoon, the kind where even the breeze felt tired. On a lonely stretch of road, an expensive silver Mercedes sat stranded, its front tire flat, its driver frustrated. Inside, 78-year-old Matthew Evans tapped the steering wheel, a rhythmic signal of his growing impatience. A retired millionaire, a man once feared in boardrooms and envied by peers, now humbled by a stubborn patch of gravel and silence. No signal, no help, just the hum of the heat and his own breath. Then, out of the wavering horizon, came a figure. A boy no more than 13 walked with quiet purpose down the road. His shirt clung to his back with sweat. His sneakers were frayed, his steps steady. Matthew leaned forward, squinting. The boy didn't hesitate. He looked at the flat tire, then at Matthew. "Got a flat, sir?" he asked, voice clear and calm. "Yes," Matthew replied, surprised by the boy's confidence. "No signal to call for help. I can fix that," the boy said with a small nod. "My grandpa taught me." Matthew pointed to the trunk. In minutes, the boy had the tools out and was kneeling by the car, hands working fast and skillfully. Matthew stood quietly, oddly compelled by the scene. There was something about the boy, something that didn't fit the ragged clothes or dusty hands. Something dignified. When the job was done, the boy stood, brushing off his jeans. All set, Matthew reached into his wallet, pulling out several bills. "Here. I really appreciate it," but the boy stepped back. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just glad I could help." He turned and walked away. Matthew stood there, money still in hand, watching the boy disappear down the road, leaving only the soft imprint of kindness behind him. That moment, that gesture, shook something loose in the old man's heart. He had built empires, made fortunes, but in decades of power and profit, no act had ever felt quite like this. That evening, Matthew sat in his vast study, surrounded by dark wood and leather chairs. The silence pressed in. He poured himself a scotch, but the drink offered no comfort. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy, about how he walked away with nothing but had left behind everything. A sense of clarity, a feeling Matthew hadn't felt in years, purpose. He didn't know the boy's name, didn't know where he lived, but he knew this. He had to find him, not to repay a favor, but to understand why a flat tire had left such a deep mark on a man who thought he had seen it all. And so, with morning light stretching over the hills, the millionaire got in his car not to close a deal or make a speech, but to search for a boy who expected nothing, yet gave more than anyone else ever had. Matthew Evans had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, yet here he was driving through small Kentucky towns with a nervous flutter in his chest. He didn't even know the boy's name. Just a dusty T-shirt, a pair of worn sneakers, and a kind smile that refused money. But something about the boy's presence haunted him, not in a painful way, but like a half-remembered song from a better time. At a roadside diner, Matthew showed the waitress a crude sketch he'd asked someone to draw based on memory. She squinted, then smiled. "Sounds like Elijah," she said. "Sweet kid. Lives out in Harlan with his mama. Always helping someone, Harlan. A dot on the map tucked in the folds of the Appalachians." Matthew had never even heard of it. But by afternoon, his Mercedes was rolling through narrow streets, lined with crumbling porches and rusted mailboxes. The town was quiet, but carried a sense of resilience, like a place that had endured, not thrived. He asked around until a gas station clerk pointed to a small, sagging house at the edge of town. The paint peeled, the fence leaned, but flowers bloomed stubbornly in pots on the porch. Matthew hesitated before knocking. When the door opened, a woman in her early 40s answered. She wore tired eyes, but her presence radiated calm. "Ma'am, I think your son helped me yesterday with a flat tire." I wanted to thank him. She smiled, warmth spreading across her face. "Sounds like Elijah. He's out back if you'd like to say hello." The backyard was more patchwork than perfection. A crooked swing set stood in one corner, and near the fence, a boy hammered nails into loose boards. He looked up, blinking in surprise. "Hey, mister." Elijah called, wiping his hands on his jeans. Matthew stepped forward, suddenly unsure of what to say. "You helped me yesterday." I couldn't stop thinking about it. Elijah shrugged. "It wasn't a big deal, but it was." Matthew studied the boy. Steady eyes, gentle posture, a quiet confidence that didn't come from wealth or status. It came from something stronger: integrity. "I'd like to do something for you and your mom," Matthew said carefully. "You didn't take anything yesterday, but I'd like to give back." "We're okay," Elijah said softly, glancing toward the house. "We don't really take handouts." "It's not a handout," Matthew replied. "It's gratitude. It's respect." Before the conversation could go further, Elijah's mother stepped onto the porch. "Would you care to stay for dinner?" she asked kindly. "It's nothing fancy, but we'd be glad to have you." Matthew, a man used to five-star meals and silverware polished by staff, nodded. "I'd like that." Inside, the kitchen was simple but welcoming. The mismatched plates, the laughter echoing from Elijah, the aroma of roasted vegetables, all unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. He hadn't felt this kind of warmth in years. During dinner, Elijah spoke of his dreams of one day becoming an engineer, of helping people by building homes or bridges. He didn't speak of money. He spoke of purpose. That night, as Matthew drove back to his mansion filled with silence and marble, he realized something profound. The boy hadn't just changed his tire. He had reminded him how to feel. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Matthew's pristine kitchen countertops, but he barely noticed. His espresso machine hissed quietly, brewing coffee he didn't touch. He was staring at his phone, not reading anything in particular, just remembering Elijah's smile, his mother's quiet strength. That modest home filled with more life than any penthouse he'd ever stepped foot in. For a man who had everything, Matthew suddenly felt like he had very little. By noon, he'd made a decision. His assistant blinked in surprise as he rattled off a list of calls to make: contractors, suppliers, architects. He didn't explain why. He just said, "It's urgent." 2 days later, Matthew stood on Elijah's street again, this time not as a guest, but as a man on a mission. A truck rolled in behind him, followed by a van of workers. Dust rose as they parked in front of the worn-out house. Elijah and his mother stepped outside, confusion painting their faces. "What's going on?" she asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. Matthew smiled, holding up a clipboard. "You gave me something I didn't even know I needed. Now I'd like to give something back." "You don't have to," she began. "I know," Matthew said gently, "but I want to." That afternoon, the front porch came down. The rotting boards were hauled away, replaced with fresh timber. The rusted swing set was dismantled. New windows arrived. Every corner of the house, inside and out, was measured, prepped, and planned for transformation. At first, Elijah tried to help hauling scrap, asking questions, but Matthew stopped him. "You've done enough," he said. "Let someone else carry the load this time." But Elijah couldn't resist for long. One of the workers, a gray-bearded man named Joe, handed him a measuring tape. "Here, kid. You ever used one of these?" And just like that, Elijah became the youngest honorary crew member. He learned how to check levels, line up drywall, and even helped design a simple planter box for the front yard. Every evening, Matthew returned to check on progress, often staying late to share meals with the family. He began to look forward to those visits the way Elijah would excitedly point out every improvement, the smell of fresh cornbread in the kitchen, the way the house slowly came alive. The renovations weren't just cosmetic, they were healing. New paint coated the walls where water stains once lived. The squeaky floorboards were silenced under smooth hardwood. The bathroom, once a patchwork of broken tiles, now gleamed. The kitchen, once dim, now bathed in light. It wasn't luxury, it was dignity. One afternoon, as the crew finished installing the final cabinet handles, Elijah stood quietly at the threshold, staring at his transformed home. Matthew joined him. "You did all this," the boy said softly. Matthew chuckled. "No, you did. I just followed your lead, but I didn't do anything. You did everything. You reminded me what matters." There was a long pause between them, one not filled with silence, but understanding. Matthew reached into his coat and handed Elijah a simple folder. "I'd like you to have this." Elijah opened it. Inside was a scholarship fund already deposited, managed and ready. It was enough to carry him through college, no matter what path he chose. Elijah blinked. "Why?" "Because you helped a stranger with a flat tire," Matthew said, his voice catching, and walked away asking for nothing. "That kind of heart deserves every door to open." Elijah didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Tears filled his eyes, and for the first time, the boy who never asked for anything received something that couldn't be bought. A future built on kindness. The day of the final reveal arrived under a wide, cloudless sky. The crew stood back, their tools packed, their job complete. The little house that once sagged with tired wood and weathered memories now stood tall, refreshed, reborn. But it wasn't just the home that had changed. It was everything. Neighbors gathered along the sidewalk, drawn by curiosity and whispers of the transformation. Some brought pies, others came with nothing but stunned smiles and heartfelt claps on the shoulder. The once forgotten house on the edge of town had become a symbol of hope, of kindness, of the power of one small gesture. Inside, Elijah couldn't stop pacing. The floors beneath his feet didn't creak anymore, and every time he passed the kitchen, the scent of new beginnings lingered like fresh paint and clean wood. He paused at the doorway, glancing back at Matthew, who stood quietly at the end of the hallway. "You didn't have to do all this," Elijah said, his voice low. Matthew smiled. "Maybe not. But sometimes doing what you don't have to makes you human." That evening, a small community celebration bloomed right in Elijah's backyard. String lights danced from tree to tree. Folding chairs were set out. A portable speaker played soft jazz while kids laughed around the new swing set. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else grilled burgers. It wasn't grand, but it was honest, and that made it perfect. Elijah stood near the fire pit, holding a paper plate piled with food he hadn't touched. He watched his mother laughing with a neighbor, her eyes brighter than he'd seen in years. Then he turned and found Matthew beside him. "You okay?" Matthew asked. Elijah nodded. "Just." Trying to take it all in, Matthew reached into his pocket and handed the boy a small, folded paper. "One last thing." Elijah unfolded it slowly. It was a certificate and internship offer from one of Matthew's engineering firms in the city. A real one. With training, mentorship, future. He looked up, eyes wide. "Only if you want it," Matthew said. "But from what I've seen, I think you'll do great." For a long second, Elijah didn't speak. His voice trembled when he finally did. "I don't even know how to thank you." "You already have," Matthew replied. "You reminded me who I used to be. You reminded me that the greatest investment isn't in stocks or property, it's in people." Later that night, when the guests had gone and the lights were dimmed, Elijah sat quietly beside his mother on the porch. The swing creaked beneath their weight, but the air was still calm. The stars blinked above like distant blessings. "You did something today," she said softly. "I just helped with a tire." Elijah replied, "No." She smiled, brushing a hand over his hair. "You changed a man's life. And your own across town, in a mansion still filled with things, but now a little less empty." Matthew stared at the photograph on his desk. It showed three people on a porch: an old man, a boy with a wide grin, and a woman who had never once stopped believing he didn't need any trophies anymore. That picture said everything. Weeks later, Elijah began his internship. It wasn't easy. The city was loud. The offices were intimidating. But he remembered what Matthew told him: "You already belong. You just haven't gotten used to it yet." And every evening, when Elijah returned to their new home, his mother was there with open arms and dinner on the stove. Sometimes they'd talk about the future. Sometimes they just sat in silence. But every so often, as he drifted off to sleep, Elijah would think about that hot day on the side of the road, about the flat tire, about the man in the Mercedes, about the choice he made to help, even when no one was watching, because sometimes the smallest acts create the biggest change. And for Elijah Turner, helping a stranger changed his entire life. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who still believes in kindness. And if you'd like to hear more powerful, true, inspired stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more voices like Elijah's into the light.